particular interest in how we sometimes misevaluate the evidence of our everyday experience, and have studied things, common sorts of beliefs, misbeliefs, that now can seem kind of quaint in a way, given all the misbeliefs we're confronting. So I've written about the belief that things happen in threes, that there'll be 3 celebrity deaths all happening at the same time, or 3 volcanic eruptions. And see what I did there is I used 3 book titles. Or the belief that, gee, you know, I didn't need something, I just threw something away, and as soon as I did, suddenly I needed that thing. You always need something after you throw it away. Or the belief that basketball shots are streakier than they actually are. There's no denying the experience that when you've made several shots in a row, you feel different. But does that translate into future performance? Nowhere near the extent to which people believe. Those are the kinds of erroneous beliefs that I started my career studying. And as I alluded to, they can seem kind of quaint now in a world where there are really more pernicious kinds of conspiracy beliefs, where people claim that fair elections were stolen from people, that people who, you can see it on video, assaulted the Capitol, that they aren't vandals or whatever else you want to call them, they are political hostages. So this is a very different sort of world. Now, of course, I wasn't alone in studying, let's call them quaint beliefs. That is, issues of skeptical inquirer focused on things like UFOs, dowsing, etc. Those are mistaken beliefs. And if you believe those things, your well-being might be diminished. Are they really going to ruin society? It's not as clear. The challenge before us now is greater. Now, of course, I don't want to pretend that all of the stuff that you've been doing, that people like us have been doing, is about things that weren't consequential. Medical beliefs really do take a toll on people. I'm not trying to say, don't get me wrong, that studying these relatively less consequential beliefs, there's no merit in that, because a premise of the whole skeptical movement is, look, if you're thinking in sloppy ways there, that's going to carry over into other areas. And here, the standard move is to quote my former Cornell colleague, Carl Sagan, who talked about if you don't instill the right habits of critical thinking, you're going to turn the world over to demagogues. Because this audience, of any audience I've ever talked to, is as familiar with Sagan as anyone I'll talk to, I'm not going to quote him. Instead, I have a friend who just finished the first volume of a biography of Kennedy, and on the day that he was assassinated, in the speech that he has access to, he says this, which is very Sagan-esque. In a world of complex and continuing problems, in a world of frustrations and irritations, America's leadership must be guided by the lights of learning and reason, or else those who confuse rhetoric with reality and the plausible with the possible will gain popular ascendancy with their seemingly swift and simple solutions to every world problem. Well, that is the world we're now living in. That a lot of folks have cast their ballots with people who do exactly that, and we're suffering as a result. We're in a world in which vaccine hesitancy is on the rise, with climate denial disturbingly common. And in the United States and elsewhere, the false belief that immigrants commit more crimes than the native population, with real consequences for lots of people's lives. So if we were sort of keeping score, if the battle between reason and darkness, were like a sporting event, we would say, maybe we're losing. we need to sort of course correct during halftime here. We've done lots of great stuff, and maybe things would be worse if there wasn't sort of a critical thinking movement that there has been. But there's room for improvement here. And what sort of halftime adjustments do we want to make? I don't pretend to have all the answers to these kinds of questions, but I do want to say a few things, a couple of things about things we've done all along that were good things, but maybe if we just altered our discussion of them a little bit, we'd get a little more out of it. Talk about a couple of those things, and then a couple of things about a particular ways in which the mind works that have given rise to the specific kinds of false beliefs that we see around us that have created this certain type of populism that is threatening the advancement of knowledge. So to start that discussion, let's go back to Scott, where I forget in which of his writings he said this, but he referred to the confirmation bias, which is a big thing that we all talk about. He referred to it as the mother of all biases, making reference to, for those of you who don't remember, Saddam Hussein, when the United States was threatening to invade. He said, if you do, that will be the mother of all battles. Well, we did invade, and it wasn't such a battle at first, and then it became a disaster, of course. Scott was right to talk about this as the mother of all biases. So much stems from it. We all teach it a lot. Because it is the mother of all biases, we teach it in a way that maybe it's confusing to people. That is to say, it's a little bit like the phenomenon of cognitive dissonance. Look about the next time you see newspapers talking about cognitive dissonance, and then go and look at what the research says about cognitive dissonance. You'll see there's a mismatch. It's a specific theory, but the way it's talked about is almost like a bunch of stuff goes on in there and it's all confused, and it's broader than it needs to be. It becomes less useful because it's broader. And to some degree, that's true of the confirmation bias. It's used to describe the fact that I'm going to treat information that supports something I believe differently than information that is at variance with what I believe. That is part of the confirmation bias. We also use it to describe the fact that, anything that is consistent with my people, what they believe, I'm going to take that in. What the other side does, I'm going to subject that to critical scrutiny, which we could call the my side bias. Those are parts of the confirmation bias. As your slide indicated, it also means when I'm testing a hypothesis, I'm going to look for evidence consistent with that hypothesis, whether I want that to be true or not. And we need to separate these terms in order to understand them. And so more fundamental than this broader thing is that very idea that you can ask me to evaluate anything, and I'm going to look for evidence for it. That makes sense in a way, because if something's true, there has to be evidence for it. So it's the most natural, logical thing in the world to go look for that evidence. The hard part is you need to also think, what's the evidence against this? One of my favorite demonstrations of just how deep-seated this is, and it's important to understand how deep-seated the confirmation bias is, comes from a study that wasn't about the confirmation bias at all, but it nonetheless illustrates this. This is Amos Tversky's study of the psychology of similarity judgments. What makes us think that, for example, that North Korea is more similar to China than China is to North Korea? If two things are similar, aren't they equally similar? No, the psychology of similarity is different. Anyway, in this study, people are asked which two countries are more similar to each other, East Germany and West Germany, that's one option, or Ceylon and Nepal. We're just asking for a judgment. There may not be a right answer. The participants were all Israeli participants, and a sizable majority says that East Germany and West Germany are more similar to each other than Ceylon and Nepal. which of course makes some sense. They're right next to each other. They share a border. They share a name, for God's sake, so of course they're similar. The interesting part is that other people were asked which two countries are more dissimilar to one another. Different set of respondents, and you find a majority. So you have this logical impossibility that these two countries are both more similar and more dissimilar. And although that logically can't be sense, psychologically it makes perfect sense. You ask me how similar they are. What are the ways in which they're similar? I look for evidence consistent with the hypothesis of similarity. These Israeli participants undoubtedly know more about East Germany and West Germany than they know about Ceylon and Nepal. So it seems compellingly to them that they are more similar to each other. You ask them instead about how dissimilar they are. Again, they know more about East Germany and West Germany. One's a capitalist country, one's a communist country. Oh, the differences come right to mind right away. So you see the evidence of a very fundamental confirmation bias there. Or another similar kind of study illustrates this. I don't think the subjects in this experiment, when specifically asked to evaluate a particular hypothesis, cared what the answer was. It doesn't matter to me. Some subjects are asked, is there a relationship between working out hard the day before, let's say a Wimbledon tennis match, and working out hard the day before and winning a match? And in order to evaluate that question, I can give you whatever information you want. I'll tell you the number of times, we've got a data set here, the number of times player worked out hard the day before and won, the number of times they worked out hard and lost, the number of times they took it easy the day before and won, etc. What would you like? And what you see is the thing that people most want is information that would confirm the hypothesis that they don't care about, but that they were asked to test. And everyone in this room knows you need all of that, because you need to know the ratio of the times you win after working out hard versus the ratio of after the times you haven't worked out hard. And like the East Germany, West Germany situation, some people are asked, is there a relationship between that and winning? Well, if there's a relationship between that and winning, there's also a relationship between winning that and losing. But other people are asked, is there a relationship between working out hard the day before and losing? And what do they want most often? Some people want all of this, but what they want most often is information that is consistent with the hypothesis. All of that, I think, is consistent with this statement that I really like from Danny Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. The mind is a machine that's biased toward belief. In this case, it's biased toward belief. You present something to me, I'm going to look for evidence for it. That sends me down the belief path rather than the disbelief path. There's another, even perhaps more fundamental way in which the mind is biased toward belief. This comes from work by Daniel Gilbert, who talks about how mental systems believe. And there's sort of two ways of thinking about this. One is Descartes' view of things, which I think is the intuitive one. If we're trying to evaluate a hypothesis, is red dye bad for you, to borrow from an example earlier today, you're going to understand the statement, and then you're going to evaluate whatever evidence you have, and then decide to believe it or not. That's one view of the world. A different view from the philosopher Baruch Spinoza is, no, that's not the way the mind works. In order to even understand something, for just a while you have to believe it. What understanding is building a mental model of something. You can't build that model without implicitly believing it, so you automatically believe something. And then, if the data don't support it, you reject it. And we're used to rejecting things. But notice that the default there is belief. Now, how do you distinguish between the Cartesian and the Spinozan procedure, which is laid out there? What Gilbert does, presents a bunch of true and false propositions to you, and then for some of them, you get occupied really quickly. It's exposed to you, and then you're made cognitively busy, so you can't evaluate it. Now, of course, being distracted by stuff is just going to impede your ability to evaluate stuff. So if all it did was just making you a worse thinker, it would distort, it would introduce noise into your beliefs. But it doesn't do that. Instead, interestingly, it doesn't interfere with your ability to see true things as true, because you initially accept them as true. Whether you're distracted or not doesn't really matter. That's the bar on the far left. It does make it harder for you to reject false things. The gray bar there is a lot lower than the black bar. So we take things in. To understand something is ever so slightly to believe it. So we're down that path of belief, and skepticism is, another way of saying this is, skepticism takes a little more. It's a little bit harder, as you probably know from teaching it. Maybe our halftime correction is to focus on a little bit more on those mental processes that have us wired for credulity, like the two I've talked about. And also, a lot of our beliefs, as we know, are things that we've reasoned ourselves to, and the critical thinking movement is to improve our reasoning ability, and we've got to deliver on that. But a lot of our beliefs are things that we just sort of feel, that seem like they're in our body as much as they're in our minds. And again, we want to apply critical thinking to disabuse ourselves of those, but maybe we want to try some other techniques too, to get the right answer in your body, to get you to feel that those things are right. So, to give you a better sense of what I'm talking about here, I want to ask you, I'm going to present you with some statements. Tell me how true they seem to you, just in your mind. You don't have to say the answer, but what's on a 10-point scale, how true are these things? Woes unite foes. So bad things, we might have not seen eye to eye, but now we're both experiencing, we've got a problematic president, let's say, hypothetically. Does that make us like each other more? How true is that? Just what score would you give it on a 10-point scale? Okay, whatever score you gave it, how true is this? Woes unite enemies. Those are exactly the same statements at some deep semantic level. But it turns out the first one seems truer to people than the second one because it rhymes. It goes down easier. Secondly, what sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals. How true is that? Versus what sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks. And again, the ones that rhyme are significantly more truthy to people than the ones that don't rhyme. These data, which I absolutely love, are in an article with one of the best titles you'll ever encounter, the title of which is "Birds of a Feather Flock Conjointly." And you just got to love that. The idea, the broader idea, that things that we can process very easily, they go down easily and they seem truer. And that's perceptually easy. We process them fluently because they rhyme and therefore they seem truer. The images of Ansel Adams, the contrast between black and white, you just perceive it so easily and we think of it as beautiful. Driver of aesthetics is fluency. Things become more fluent because of repetition. Mere repetition of stuff, we might know that there's no validity, so what that you repeat something over and over again, nonetheless can start to feel a little more true. So when FDR said repetition does not transform a lie into truth, well, that is true, but it's false when it comes to what people think of as true. And we have no less of an odious authority than Joseph Goebbels, who said, repeat a lie often enough and it becomes the truth. And Hitler himself, propaganda must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over again. That repetition makes things, doesn't make them more true, but it makes them more truthy. And we see the implications of this in today's world all the time. Well, before today's world, let's go back a little bit. The Nazis published deliberately, in order to take advantage of this truthiness, lists of crimes committed by groups that they didn't like: communists, Jews, homosexuals, etc. In Trump administration #1, we did exactly the same thing, publishing immigrant crimes of the week. And if you keep hearing from people that if you publicized crimes committed by immigrants, even if you factually know that no, and it's been documented over and over again, immigrants in the United States and in other countries as well commit fewer crimes. Of course they do, because they're afraid of being arrested and sent out of the country. It makes perfect sense that they would. Nonetheless, you hear about this all the time. Part of you starts to believe it. And we can engage in critical thinking so you reject it, but you're having to work to reject it. Maybe another way is to beat them at their own game and create different associations. So let me show you a video. Here's maybe a better way to do this. This comes from Billy on the Street, who's a television star, to try to convince you, no, immigrants don't commit crimes at a higher proportion than natives.
Kevin, here's how it's going to work. I'm going to read you a name of a famous person. You have to tell me if this person was born in America, in which case they're a real American, or if they weren't, they're an immigrant. Immigrant or real American? Are you ready? Here we go, Kevin. Immigrant or real American? If you get enough right, you have a prize to take home to Alex. Here we go. Immigrant or real American? And away we go. Mila Kunis. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Jeffrey Dahmer. Real American. Yes, correct. Pierce Brosnan. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Charles Manson. A real American. Yes, correct. Salma Hayek. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Gloria Estefan. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Ted Bundy. Real American. Yes, correct. Charlize Theron. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Antonio Banderas. Immigrant. Yes, correct. The Unabomber. Real American. Yes, correct. Ferguson. He's an immigrant. Yes, he is. Lee Harvey Oswald. Real American. Yes, correct. The Boston Strangler. Oh, God. Real American. Yes, correct. Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer. He's an immigrant. Yes, he is. Timothy McVeigh. Real American. Yes, he is. Natalie Portman. She's an immigrant. Yes, she is. Jackie Chan. Immigrant. Yes, correct. Casey Anthony. She's a real American. Yes, she is. Carlos Santana. He's an immigrant. Yes, correct. Albert Einstein. He is an immigrant. Yes, he was. O.J. Simpson. Real American. Yes, correct. Did you win? Yes, you win. You win. Bisexual. You win. Let's see what you win. Oh, bisexual. Look at this. Look if you win.
Okay. So the broader point there is, yes, we want to engage in building up our critical thinking skills, in Kahneman's terms, building up system 2. But that doesn't mean that we should ignore system 1. We should be at work building up these same kinds of associations. We have a brain that forms these associations automatically. And if they're playing that game, we should combat it with the real, drive home the real statistics, case by case. You can, another source of fluency that makes things seem truer is visual contrast, as I not only makes them seem truer, but more appealing. So if you ask people about the Moses illusion, how many animals of each kind did Moses take on the ark? The numbers who answer without noticing, wait, it wasn't Moses who had the ark. If you present it in easy-to-read format, you're processing it very easily, and you just readily, and off you go. You don't notice it. You degrade the font. You have to think a little bit more. Hey, wait a minute, it wasn't Moses, and you get it. So visual contrast can do it. Sources that are easy to pronounce. People who post on eBay and have easy to pronounce names, turns out whatever they're listing goes for higher, they sell at higher prices. Lawyers who are trying to make partner, you're more likely to make it if your name is easy to pronounce in whatever culture you're in. So the Trump administration just passed its one big, beautiful bill full of all sorts of awful stuff. But you keep hearing it seems crazy, one big beautiful bill, even as you're rejecting it each time you hear it. You hear it over and over again, it starts to sink in, and we need to combat that as well. And so we see a lot of exactly what Kennedy was warning us about. And we see it, I don't know if I'm biased just because I'm American, in most pronounced fashion in the United States, but it's not simply in the United States. Seeing similar things with the rise of more totalitarian governments around the world, the rise of a right-wing populism with a very disturbing totalitarian element. So thinking critically about things is something of an antidote to that. But I want to go beyond that and talk about some specific ways that the mind works that leads to these specific kinds of problems that we're seeing today. And to start that, this is the most difficult part of the talk for me, not for you. This is where I'm going to try to convince you that you're more like Donald Trump than you think you are. That's a real hard sell in the United States. In Canada, I bet it's even harder. But here goes. So let's listen to Donald here. What happened to the sound? Uh-oh. It's weird that the other one had sound. Let's try one. All right, well, what he says is, it hasn't been easy for me. I started out, my father gave me a small loan of $1 million. I had to pay him back. And I went into Manhattan, etc. So he's got this gift. He has a father who can give him $1 million. And the way he talks about it sounds as much like a burden. Oh, poor Donald, you had to pay him back. And it was a small loan. When most people are looking at that like, come on, I wish my dad would do that. So a real benefit is described not quite as an obstacle, but almost like an obstacle. Okay, that's Donald. Now, how are you like him? How many people here, let's say, go running or cycling for exercise? Okay. You notice when you go out there, and like it is right now, and you're running into the wind, it's kind of annoying. It's kind of hard, right? And you're aware of the wind the whole time, and you think, oh, I can't wait till we turn around and go that way, and the wind's at your back. And when that happens, you turn around, you're grateful for like a second, and then you forget about it. And what's true of running and cycling is true about life. That is, those hard things that you have to overcome, you have to pay attention to them in order to overcome them. Those things that are boosting you along, you don't have to pay attention to them. This is what we've called the headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry. You have to pay attention to those hard things in life in order to overcome them. The easy things in life you don't have to pay attention to. In fact, if you right now went on Google Images and typed in headwinds, you'd get stuff like this, which are real pictures showing how hard it is to combat a headwind. You can capture it photographically. You type in tailwinds, you won't see a photo. Instead, you'll see a schematic of it to convey it. And what's true photographically is true generally in life and psychologically in life. The headwinds register in a ways that the tailwinds don't. And that can make life seem unfair to you, and we'll get to the political ramifications in a second. Before we do, just to convince you of this, you see it in all sorts of places. If you ask siblings, who had it easier? Who did mom and dad go easier on? There's sort of two things that happen here. One is people recognize older kids have it somewhat harder. The older kids believe that vastly more than the younger kids do because the things that they had to confront stick out to them. political partisans in the United States, especially with this weird electoral college. Both sides think the electoral college is biased against them. Political scientists would say, no, no, that's wrong. It's easy to demonstrate that it's biased against Democrats, but Republicans nonetheless believe that. All right, what do we got going on here? First the sound. It's like, okay. Sports fans, the refs or the schedulers feel we have a harder schedule than you do, even though we're competing against you. Or the sports participants themselves. Here's a survey at Williams College where you ask people who participate in different sports. I know Williams College is not the huge Ohio State powerhouse, but nonetheless, it's every sport thinks that playing their sport is harder on them, the student athletes, than those other kinds of sports in terms of the amount of institutional support they get, the demands of it, the physical toll, how much it impacts their academics, etc. So in all of these walks of life, it's so easy to get in touch with how we have it harder than these other folks. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, is this really, do people really believe this? Maybe this is like Trump, who's always just claiming stuff so that you'll think better of him if he succeeds, and you won't think ill of him if he fails. We're used to that. Psychologists call it self-handicapping. Self-handicapping exists. Some of that may be at play here, but I want to convince you that that's not the only thing we see here. And getting back to Danny Kahneman, in talking about what he called the heuristics of judgment, he said that when confronted with a difficult question, people often answer an easier one instead, usually without being aware of the substitution. This is the attribute substitution model of heuristics. That may be a little arcane, but how does that apply here? I want to present two thought experiments to you to illustrate that this isn't just self-handicapping, although some of that may be going on here. In my native state of California, there's a terrific trail, 211 miles, that goes from Yosemite Valley to Mount Whitney, the highest point in the contiguous 48 states, the John Muir Trail. You can hike it from north to south or south to north. I'm convinced that if you stationed a surveyor at both points, you're at Yosemite Valley, and you interview people who've walked from south to north, and you say, what percentage of the trail was uphill? They would give you a certain percentage. And you stationed someone on the south, interviewed all the people from going north, and said, what percentage of the trail is uphill? They would give you a percentage. If you added those two percentages together, it'd be way more than 100%. It can't be, but that psychologically it would. Why? Well, the question, what percentage of the trail was uphill, that's hard. What's easier and related to that is, how much time did I spend? Even that's kind of hard. How much time did I spend walking uphill? That's an easier question. You can ask about your own experience. You can answer that better than you can answer the experience of the trail. It takes longer to walk uphill than downhill. So both groups probably did spend more time walking uphill than downhill. You substitute one for the other, and both sides think the trail has been biased against them. If you're not a hiker, okay, let me ask you this. How many people played the board game of Scrabble? Yeah, it's a game that's kind of losing popularity. Well, in your career as a Scrabble player, on average, have you gotten better letters than your opponent? I don't know any Scrabble player who's ever said that, and yet people often complain. Why? Well, if you keep this headwinds, tailwinds idea in mind, of course people are going to think that. Oops, those are the ending points of the trail. When you get terrible letters, they're going to be with you for a while. You can't play those, so you're going to experience a lot of the time in a game is going to be, how do I get rid of all these I's that don't count for very many points? So you're going to experience your bad letters longer because they're bad letters, hard to play. Your good letters, you get those, you play them, and they're gone. You haven't spent that much time with them. Both, everyone can think they've gotten worse letters than their opponents. To really demonstrate this headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry, you can just do simple kinds of studies like this one, which we did. We had people simulate, essentially working in an editorial office. You are going to encounter some sentences. If they're green, just click a button, go to the next screen. That's the easy part. If the sentence is blue, you have to count the number of vowels in the sentence and then click on it and go on to the next one. So we then present them, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. What we've got here is a failure to communicate. I'll make him an offer he can't refuse. Obviously, all famous lines from movies. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And then after they've seen a bunch of these sentences, how many of them were the blue ones? How many of them were the green ones? You've had to spend more time with the hard ones. And of course, we counterbalance for half the subjects. The green ones are the hard ones. The other subjects, the blue ones, are the hard ones. And whichever one were the hard ones are the ones that register with you more. And therefore, you think there are more of those. Why am I saying all this? Well, that simple cognitive bias has implications. One of the implications we explored with a study with the American Accounting Association, the discipline of accounting, I didn't know this before we started this, like many disciplines, divides itself into experimental accounting, who knew, and non-experimental accounting. And so we wanted to ask them about headwinds and tailwinds that they face in their professional lives. Who has it harder, the experimentalists or the non-experimentalists, when it comes to getting their papers published? And each group thinks the other group has it easier than they do. The experimentalists think the experimentalists have it harder in terms of landing a job, getting grants, getting tenure. Across all of those, they think their side is just harder. And I know there are a bunch of psychologists here. If you ask psychology graduate students, who has it harder, the developmentalists or the cognitive psychologists? Both groups will say, oh, those developmentals, they run like 10 babies, and that's all. Their subject sizes are so small. How long can that take? Whereas we have to have these giant sample sizes. The developmental psychologists will then truthfully say, do you know how hard it is to run a kid? And so both of them are right. So this is just a replication of what I've already shown you, but it's a replication with an important feature added. That is, we wanted to see, thinking that your life is biased against you, what impact does that have on you? And here we were going after this quote from Nietzsche's, that nothing consumes a person more quickly than resentment. If you feel like things are biased against you, you're going to be resentful. And I think one of the big truths about the human condition is when you're feeling the opposite of resentment, you're a better person. And there's lots of studies showing that when you're grateful, you can delay gratification more, you're healthier, you're happier, you're more generous to other people. We all use this phrase, oh, I'm trying to be my best self. I'm trying to live up to my best self. You're better able to do that when you're full of gratitude. You're less able to do that when you're resentful. So this thing that I showed you before is just a replication of what we already knew. So we weren't interested in that. We were interested in what does that experience do to you. So right after they just filled those out, we asked them about some questionable scientific practices. How bad is this? That there are certain times when it's okay to be included as a co-author on a paper, even if your contributions weren't significant. Is that okay or not? How okay is that? It's permissible to accept research funds from an ethically questionable corporation if one's research is not itself questionable. how, these aren't the worst practices, but they're pretty dodgy. How much do you agree with them? Allowing one dislike for a colleague to influence your review of their work, how okay is that? The prediction is, because you've just thought about you've been disadvantaged, you're more tempted to engage in these things because you're feeling resentful. The world is biased against you. And that's exactly what we see here, the blue line over there. The more that experimentalists believe that experimentalists have it harder, the more they say, yeah, those things are okay. And then the red line going in the opposite direction, the more they think that non-experimentalists have it harder to the left, the more those things seem okay. And I think we see this all over the place, this headwinds, tailwinds asymmetry, nudging people in the resentful direction and less in the gratitude or grateful direction. We see it with hubris and different policymakers' misguided decisions. So when the United States, with the cooperation of our allies that we're now treating badly, we invaded Iraq, it was to create a model democracy in Iraq. Well, maybe that involves a little bit of hubris. That is, it takes institutions to create a democracy, and if you're trying to impose it de novo, maybe it's a kind of a riskier proposition than you think. If the culture hasn't gradually built those up, imposing it may not work. As Paul Bremer put it, we were so busy trying to, the head of the coalitional provisional authority, the person sort of responsible for running Iraq after the government fell, we were so busy trying to build a capitalist economy that we neglected the big picture. We squandered an enormous opportunity, and we didn't realize it until everything blew up in our faces. A capitalist economy requires free markets. How is there a guarantee that the markets are going to be free, et cetera? What are the institutions that make it work? Plopping it down is riskier than it might seem. We also see that with the fall of the Soviet Union will introduce shock free market therapy, again, without a history of institutions that support the kinds of economies we wanted. How well do they work? Well, history has told us how well that works. And we see it with public sentiment that can lead to misguided policies, voters who just want to shake things up. Shaking things up are really good when you have a really bad hand, but if you've got one of the freest, most prosperous countries in the world, you might want to think a little bit more about just shaking things up. We live in a world where we're encouraged to move fast and break things. If that isn't hubristic, I don't know what is. And in the United States, there's this often repeated notion that there's a war on white Christian men. And yeah, the privileges that come with being a white Christian man are a little bit less than they used to be, by a little bit, but does that translate into there being a war? But again, this headwinds, the burdens you have to face compared to the benefits that you've received can make it seem that way. So I think we see this playing out in all around the world with these beliefs that are encouraging this kind of embrace of totalitarianism. I want to quickly talk about one more thing of a similar way in which the mind works in a surprising way that supports what we are seeing. And I guess I don't have, well, let's see. The audio worked in the first one, maybe it'll work on this one.
Officers are overwhelmed in several directions. And retreat to guard Capitol entrances. But these rioters believe they've been deputized by their president to stop a crime. And now they start trying to get into the building itself.
Okay, so you've seen footage like that before, but what I wanted you to pay attention to was the comment, "We want our country back," which is interesting. When you're attacking the sort of emblem of the United States, aren't you destroying that country rather than taking it back? There's something kind of strange there. Well, what is that country that they want back? Other people have done research on this looming demographic change in the United States, and Europe is every bit as concerned about this as the United States is. When the United States will become a majority-minority country, that is, white people won't be a majority, they'll just be the biggest minority group. What happens when that's the case, and people have done research showing that when you remind people of that, they feel threatened. They have more anger toward ethnic minorities among white Americans and Canadians, greater support for conservative policies, greater interest in moving out of diversifying neighborhoods. White people are kind of freaked out by this. And there's a way in which that's it's understandable. It's not like you feel like that violates my sense of what humanity is like. But there's a way in which it's kind of puzzling. Politics, like college courses, is graded on a curve. That is, it's not like white people are then going to be a tiny minority. They're still going to be by far the biggest minority. They'll have the biggest political, social, and economic influence. So what's the concern? Well, maybe there's a second bias here that's contributing to it. Maybe white people are concerned that, yeah, they're not going to think of it as we're the biggest minority. It's all those other minorities, they have more in common with each other than we do, and they're going to team up and vote their interests rather than our interests. So is it the case, in other words, that white people think of these various minorities as more monolithic than they actually are? That is, we have these terms to lump them all together. We refer to people of color, for example. Does that homogenize them in people's minds so that they think that, yeah, they have more in common, they're going to band together. So in other words, is there an extension of the well-known outgroup homogeneity effect? You think your group is very diverse, that other group is unified. We can see that everywhere, including Trump sort of saying, shouldn't Canada be the 51st state? Wait a minute. This is a country with a whole bunch of provinces. Shouldn't they be a whole bunch of other states? And no, we're lumping them all together. They're just Canadian. When the provinces, as you know, are very different from one another. That is the outgroup homogeneity effect. Is there an outgroups homogeneity effect? Do people think that members of all these different minorities have more in common than members of the majority? That's the question. So to find this out, you ask majority group members, do they perceive minorities as a homogeneous group? And is that aided and abetted by labeling? So in one study, you get 300 white participants, and they're assigned to different conditions. One group is asked about the in-group. If we took two randomly selected white people, how similar would they be on all of these dimensions? Another group, individuated outgroups. If we took two randomly selected people from Hispanics in the United States, black people in the United States, Asian people in the United States, how similar would they be? Or you lump them together from people of color. How similar are two randomly selected people of color? And those are the exact questions that they're asked. And same thing with the individuated outgroups and the umbrella outgroups. On political attitudes, vision for America, core values, causes that care most about, cultural impact they have on the US. And what you see is people think that members of these different groups, think about how bizarre that is. People of different groups on average, are more similar than two people from a single group. And it's not, and you see it applies across the different, how helpful they are, different values and political beliefs, etc. So you see it across the board. You might be worried that, well, maybe people are confused about the question. Maybe they're thinking when you're asking about two people of color, oh, it's like two black people. Maybe two black people are more similar than two white people or two Asian people are. That's less of a problem. So you can deal with that by focusing in on the question. Please rate the similarity of two randomly selected people of color. Maybe there's some confusion there. Please rate the similarity of two randomly selected people from the LGBTQ community, which is an umbrella group, and it sort of makes it easy to understand. It could be from any of those groups. Or, to make it more clear, please rate the similarity of two randomly selected people within and across Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, the smaller countries in the UK as opposed to England. So, do we get it in those situations as well? You ask heterosexual people about the average similarity of two heterosexual people versus two people from the LGBT community, which are different communities. Same kind of thing. You get the same result there. So what we seem to get is an out-groups homogeneity effect rather than the simple out-group homogeneity effect. Do the minority groups also believe this? Well, to test that, rerun the same experiment, not just with cisgender heterosexual participants, but members of those communities as well. And you see the same result there. Members of the LGBTQ community think that any two randomly selected people from those different groups are more similar than members of the heterosexual group. The obvious question for psychologists is, why would that be the case? Why do we think members of these different groups are more similar? That creates all this discombobulation with political consequences than members of the bigger group. Well, we borrow here from perceptual psychology the idea of the Gestalt principle of common fate. When you see things that seem to share the same movement in this case, they share the same past, they're moving in the same direction, they're going to be more similar. And we might very well think that members of these different minority groups, even if they're different, they're experiencing the same history of oppression, et cetera, that makes them seem more similar. So to test this, we just asked about the UK. How similar are members of the three different minority countries versus two randomly selected English people to see if we get the same effect. And you do get it. The English think that the Welsh, Northern Irish, and the Scots are more similar to each other than are the English. And the Scottish, Welsh, and Northern Irish think the same thing. If you ask them how much have they shared the same past history and future fate, those ratings correlate with this belief. So it's thinking of these groups moving together historically, sharing the same fate that produces this. I'm going to kind of stop there. I've got a little more data on this, but I hope I've made the point here that these things can, this is where we manipulate your sense of the common fate of these minority groups, and it has the predictable effect. So in conclusion, I want to say a couple of things. So what does this, as it says in this guest essay, what the majority-minority shift really means for America? What do people believe it means? Other people have shown that it has consequences. It freaks some people out, and we're seeing that in votes that are cast. And the concerns seems to be not being about one of many, the biggest kid on the block, but being swamped by the many. That is, they're all going to unite against us. And that gives rise to these problematic, or contributes to these problematic kinds of things that I alluded to earlier. There's one obvious thing that I haven't talked about when we're talking about credulity and its political implications that we see around the world, which is the idea of how much this is aided and abetted by modern social media. I do have something to say about that, and I was going to end with it, but we're going to have a panel, and I suspect that's going to come up in the panel, so I'll hold off till then. In the meantime, thank you for your time and attention, and we'll set up here and have this let's get to the panel. Pardon? Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll handle it. We still have a few minutes, so I'm going to abuse a little bit about...
Oh, right. I was looking at 4 and saying, oh, I should wrap up now.
Yeah, so before
Okay.
the panel, if anyone has questions to Tom, we still got a few minutes, so please.
Yeah.
Hey, so you were kind of saying about the battle that being lost and you have to make some adjustments to win the battle. One thing I noticed is the ability of the other side, if you will, to sort of play dirty, and the reluctance of us to not play by those sort of rules. And another big thing that comes up, which I think you were going to touch on, is like the presence of bots that just flood social media with false claims.
Yeah.
That even though you know they're false, as you were saying, just hearing them can raise things like vaccine hesitancy. So what do you think of that sort of imbalance?
Well, okay, so let me take the first one. So there's sort of 2 things there. That is, it's a common complaint on the part of the left in the United States to say, we're just nicer than they are, and they play rougher. You know, we bring a knife to a gunfight, that kind of, you hear that over and over again. And it's hard to speak to that without sort of name-calling the other side, which I'm a little reluctant to. I believe there's truth to that. I think there is something about being a member of a skeptical society, for example, that's going to put a lid on a kind of viciousness. It makes you think, oh, who knows? It kind of makes you more reticent to engage in that. So I think there is some truth to that. I think an even bigger problem, but let's put that aside for a second, an even bigger, so let's suppose that's true for a second. What happens is that the meaner side says this stuff and does these things, and now you're in power. It's tempting, like, oh, they're going to play that way, we want to play that way. And they can easily turn that against you. So, for example, that, without any great evidence, Trump has claimed that, the Biden crime, again, taking advantage of fluency, the Biden crime family. There was some modest stuff with Hunter Biden. Compared to what Trump has done, it's just night and day. And so right now, the Justice Department is looking at the weaponization of the Biden Justice Department when they're investigating people who we can all see have attacked the Capitol. Fast forward 3 years, when hopefully the Democrats are in power. Sorry to give away my political leanings there. If there's good cause to go after some of the things that Trump is doing. When you do that, you're really going to hear about the weaponization of the, and so politically there's an unfairness there too. It's how to get out from under that. When someone makes a false accusation of you, and then you apply that to them, it's interpreted in a way that could be problem for your side. And that's going to be a problem we're going to face for a while. It just as a, if we're going down the political path.
I have a question, Tom.
Yeah.
It's very anecdotal evidence, of course, but I'm from Brazil, which is very similar to the US in terms of immigration and diversity. But when I came to the US, I was kind of impressed by how insular people are when they refer to minorities. And I never had to fill a form in Brazil about ethnicity and color, and people looked at me, and I'm very hard to place in any box, because people look at me and they look at my name and it's Natalia Pasternak, and I don't look like the stereotype Brazilian, and I speak fluent English, or this time, I hope so, and so people don't know where to put me. And I had a lot of situations when people looked at me and said, oh, are you Hispanic? And I would say, well, no, because we don't separate people like that in Brazil. And in the US, people refer to themselves as African Americans or Asian Americans, and in Brazil, we're just Brazilian. There is no such thing as an African Brazilian, or in my case, a Ukrainian Brazilian.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense to us. So how cultural is the whole minority perception, really? I only have this very anecdotal comparison, but it's very similar countries in terms of diversity of people. And of course, we have the same situation where people feel persecuted by minorities in Brazil. We have that. But the way that people perceive minorities is different.
That's a very complicated subject. So there's lots of historical examples where it seemed that people weren't assorting into different ethnic categories when things were going well, and then when things went badly, all of a sudden they did. So people talked about Sarajevo as being one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Marshal Tito had kept Yugoslavia, these different groups, together pretty well. They thought of themselves as Yugoslavians. And then with his passing, that all collapsed, and you got this in-group, out-group stuff. And then as soon as the flame was lit, that was really kind of awful. So I don't think, the United States is unique in a variety of ways, history of slavery, et cetera, that makes it different than some other places. But what you see in the United States, you see sort of pretty much everywhere. Brazil is interesting on the racial part in particular. I think a lot of people, I'm not an expert on that, a lot of people have said that, that there is something that makes them an outlier.
And it's not that we don't have racism in Brazil, well, of course we do.
Yeah.
But for me, it was kind of shocking to see how different it was in the US, and how Americans really, they seem to have this need of categorizing everyone. And I know it could be I'm not saying it's ill intention. I mean, sometimes they do they think that by doing that they are protecting minorities, because they want to know how many Hispanic professors they have or how many white professors they have. So I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but it's just a thing that I was not used to. And I was not used to filling all these forms. They were, why are people interested in that?
So in Brazil, they don't ask about your ethnic background or racial background or anything like that. And all forms in the U.S., you have to answer that.
So
Or at least you used to. We'll see how far that.
Yeah.
And for us as Brazilians, it was hard because, for instance, the Hispanic thing is kind of messy with us, because we were not colonized by Hispanics. We're a Portugal colony. family. And we have a lot of immigration from like everywhere in the world. We're all over the place. So my family came from Ukraine. My husband's family came partly from Spain, partly from Portugal. So when he gets the forms, he says, I really don't know if I'm Hispanic in origin or in ancestry or not, and we don't have that in Brazil. So we will just assume that, well, it's just a melting pot, and that's what it is.
Well, one irony of your question is, okay, what are the implications of racial relations in the United States versus Brazil? That's an interesting question. Someone ought to study that. Not in the United States. If you have a grant that you propose, you have a funded grant to study that. Boom, it's gone now. Now, how long that will last, we don't know. But that's exactly the kind of thing that a lid is being put on.